Commandos. No, not that old 1998 game, but rather the laptop brand. For those of you who do not know Commandos, well, the line of laptops are owned by Tech Armory, a small boutique computer store here in Malaysia whose owner loves describing himself as a very selective and choosy person. I mean, it even says here so on their website. So when they asked me to take a look at one of their laptops, naturally, I was just a bit curious as well, because a laptop from someone who claims himself as such implies a machine with little to no compromises. Perhaps I'm setting the bar just a bit high here, but you know what? Obviously, this is written and filmed in the future after I've already reviewed the laptop, and I've got to say that I walked out of this one plenty impressed. Probably the only thing that I am disappointed of is the name of the laptop, and this guy is called the Glock 5 Gen 2, which honestly is just not the best name, and I'm not really going to get into that, but rather I'm going to tell you why this laptop impressed me with my review of the Commandos Glock 5 Gen 2. So, small companies like Tech Armory typically and most commonly do not have their own factories making their own laptops, and so the Glock 5 Gen 2 is no different, as it is made by Clevo and is actually the Clevo NK60 SE. Clevo devices have historically been very solid for me, as well as well-built machines, so this starts things off well. The Glock 5 Gen 2 is a budget gaming laptop with a desktop Intel Core i5-10400, yes, the exact same kind that you stick into PCs, and that's not the only unadulterated desktop-sized part here, as the GPU is also a desktop class NVIDIA GeForce 1650 with 4GB of GDDR6. How do I know this? Well, I checked out GPU-Z and I noticed that this GPU is using the TU117 chip with 896 shaders and using GDDR6, and over on Tech PowerUp's GPU database and video cards, the only 1650 that matches up with these specs is the newer desktop class 1650 GDDR6. The numbers, as we'll see later, are also more in line with a desktop class GPU. Aside from that, the model that I have is also kitted with 2 sticks of 8GB DDR4 RAM for a total of 16GB, a Phison 512GB S11 SATA SSD, Intel AC9462 wireless, so no Wi-Fi 6 here, a 16.1-inch 1080p 99% sRGB 60Hz panel, and a 47Wh battery. As expected, the laptop isn't all that light, but it really isn't all that heavy either, at just 2.4 kilograms and sizes in at 37.8 centimeters wide, 25 centimeters deep, and 3.7 centimeters at its thickest of the table, making it very similar in size to a 15.6-inch laptop, despite having a larger display. For a gaming laptop, the power brick is actually pretty light and small at just 560 grams, delivers 150 watts of power, and is made by Chickeny. The only form of branding that we have on the laptop is over on the top with the Commandos logo, with blue LED strips flanking both sides of it. There is a vent, a mini DisplayPort, a full-sized HDMI port, a USB 3.2 10GB Type-C port followed by 2 USB 3.2 Type-A ports, one 5GB and another 10GB on the left, and over on the right a full-sized SD card reader, thank you, a dedicated 3.5mm port for both headphone and microphones, a USB 2.0 Type-A port, a full-sized Ethernet port, and a barrel charging port. You might look at this and think to yourself that there is another vent here, but this is actually just, an aesthetic and is blocked off. This is a good and a bad thing, as it means that if you're right-handed, hot air won't actually spew onto your mouse hand when gaming, but it might also affect operating temperatures, which we will cover later in this video. The power and charging battery, disk activity, and airplane mode LED indicators are over on the front left of the laptop, and there is nothing notable on the back aside from 2 vents on each opposite corner. The bottom of the laptop has ample amount of vents for cooling together with a removable battery, which is not something we often see these days, but this is still very welcome, and let's take a look at what's beneath the plastic cover. To do so, we first remove the battery, then unscrew the 6 screws holding it in place and simply pop the panel off. We get our first good look at the cooling of this laptop, and Everything is just handled by 2 heat pipes and 2 fans for both the desktop class CPU and GPU, but as you will see later, the results are extremely surprising. I also asked if in the future it would be possible to swap out the 10th gen Intel Core CPU for, let's say, an 11th gen 11600, and they said that it should work without an issue as the motherboard supports dropping in of 11th gen CPUs. So that's pretty cool and kind of future proofing, if you of course consider one generation of upgrades future proof. There are 2 M.2 slots here, though only one of them supports PCIe, SATA and Optane SSDs, while the other is just PCIe. Speaking of SSDs, of course, the Phison S11 that came with this laptop is using a SATA interface with a DRAM-less design, and based on some tests with it, it's not really the fastest thing out there, but I suppose for a budget laptop it's okay. But I'd be wary about filling it up though, as DRAM-less SSDs slow down exponentially the more that they're filled. There are also 2 RAM slots, and it's been kitted out with one from Crucial and the other from Patriot, which apparently they also commonly use to make the total of 16GB. Another thing to note of here is a SATA slot, which is handy if you'd like to expand your storage on the laptop without breaking the bank. Overall, the laptop, unfortunately to me at least, has a bit of a dated design, meaning that it's really solid and feels great, but it really doesn't look like much. It just looks like a generic gaming laptop. But you know what? I'm pretty sure that we're not here for looks, we're here for bang for buck. So let's move on to checking out what's inside. The laptop passes my one-handed lid opening test, and of course the first thing that we see when we open up the screen is the 16.1-inch matte IPS display from Innolux that is calibrated to about 99% sRGB and honestly looks pretty good, but doesn't really get all that bright or dark unfortunately, and is only 60Hz. Above that is the webcam that has a white LED that comes on whenever it's in use.
And surprisingly, the video quality isn't all that bad from this webcam, and one of the nice things about running a GTX laptop as of late is if let's say you're in a really loud or noisy environment, you can always enable RTX voice like so, and give it a little bit of time. As, yeah, you can probably hear right now, things are a little bit different, things are a little bit cleaner, as RTX voice now works with GTX graphics cards without needing any kind of modding or whatnot.
The keyboard is full-sized, and just like every other Clevo machine that I've tested before, the typing experience is good with very noticeable actuation points, very solid keys and almost zero wobble and no dead zones on the longer keys. They are backlit and kinda RGB because the software only really lets you choose one color at a time. Aside from that, you have the standard set of function keys on a laptop with an option to also disable the camera for privacy reasons. And finally, we get to the touchpad that is a reasonable size, not the biggest that I've used, and I do like them bigger. But as far as touchpads go, this one's pretty nice as the touch area tapers into the body and the left and right clicks have a nice feel and sound to them. We move on to the software side of things, and aside from Sound Blaster Cinema 6, the only other preloaded app here is Control Center, which is the Clevo app for controlling the laptop. Power mode allows you to cycle between quiet, power saving, entertainment and performance, each of them tuning the CPU, GPU and fan accordingly. Flexi key for setting up macros for your keyboard and mouse, LED keyboard which we already touched on earlier, and fan speed control that allows you to max out the fans, set offsets, create custom fan curves or just set them automatically. And now I think we get to the part that I think everyone is waiting for, the performance, and let's start off with the Core i5-10400 inside. In Cinebench R20, it may be a surprise to some or it might not, but compared to my Core i7-9750H, which sports the same amount of cores and threads, the 10400 totally kills it in terms of multi-core, but loses out in single core, probably because of that slower max clock speed. It did the same in Blender, coming in at just 4 minutes and 49 seconds in the BMW test, but I think that what's extremely surprising is that the temperatures didn't really get all that high. We're talking about a desktop chip here maxing out at only 83 odd Celsius in a 30 Celsius environment and not thermal throttling at all, which is incredibly surprising because remember guys, this laptop only has 2 heat pipes in it, probably 2 of the best heat pipes that I've ever seen then. Of course, it did hit the power limits of this laptop, but it still managed to hit a near consistent 4 GHz all-core for about 1 minute at 83 watts before it settled down to about 3.8 GHz at 70 watts and had temperatures hovering around the 80s. I gotta admit that I honestly didn't believe that this laptop couldn't thermal throttle, so I ran it again in Cinebench R23 under the 10-minute thermal throttle test, and it really didn't thermal throttle. By the way, every time you see a downward spike in the graph, it denotes an end in the run and restarting again. The strange thing about the results was that after the first test, which mostly ran at 4 GHz, there seemed to be a long period in which it ran for about 2.9 GHz before going back up to 4 again, then 3.8 for a short while, then 2.9 in sort of a rinse and repeat manner. Temperatures were perfectly fine, maxing out at only about 80, and the power draw during the low periods was about 36 watts, so based off the charts I can only deduce that this has something to do with the way Intel does sustained clocks. After all, 2.9 is exactly the baseline speed of the 10400. That's the CPU though. What about the GPU? Well, in TimeSpy, it scored just shy of 3700 in most cases, with the graphics score again just shy of 3500. Those scores puts it very close to the vanilla desktop variant of the GTX 1650, helping further cement that we have a desktop chip in a laptop body. The same goes for Unigine, where the scores that the 1650 in the Glock 5 Gen 2 achieved has it comparable to a reference GTX 1650. When it comes to gaming benchmarks, using the built-in tool in Assassin's Creed Valhalla under the 1080p medium preset, the Glock 5 Gen 2 pulled a respectable average of 45 FPS. It also got a 1% low of 34 FPS and a 0.1% low of 31 FPS, which is not too bad. In Horizon Zero Dawn under the original preset, the 1650 inside got an average of 54 FPS with a 1% low of 30 FPS and a 0.1% low of 27 FPS, which is pretty good given that this and Assassin's Creed Valhalla are both single-player games, and for a single-player experience, that kind of FPS is not ideal, but it's more than enough to play it. I messed around in a couple of games like my usual Insurgency Sandstorm and Call of Duty Warzone, and yeah, even though I didn't really get to bump the quality settings all the way for the games that I played, I still had a really good time without any issues with Call of Duty Warzone in my tests, coming in at about 60 to 70 FPS on a medium-low setting, and the 1% and 0.1% lows being about 52 and 37 FPS respectively. During these tests and gaming, the CPU and GPU hit about 75 degrees and 64.5 degrees respectively at a maximum, and while the keyboard area gets slightly warm, it doesn't in any way feel uncomfortable, coming in at just about 37 to 39 Celsius. Things are equally as good on the noise front because the fans are honestly pretty acceptable even under load, and this is probably some kind of black magic because come on, a laptop with a desktop chip which only has 2 heat pipes, has great temperatures for a laptop, and doesn't need to spin up like a commercial airliner? That's unheard of. You gotta lose somewhere though, and that is exactly where the speaker department comes in, as even for its larger size, the speakers are, well, pretty meh, as they sound pretty one-dimensional and kinda muffled with no clear highs or bass.
I think I want it this way. It's the best I can do. He's right behind you. Hi! Happy birthday, Isaac. Daddy sure does love his little big man. Look, Daddy can't be there with you and Mom, but We can still have a party, right? Sure we can.
We get onto battery life, and this is another department that kinda surprised me. Bear in mind that you're still not gonna get that kind of long runtime with my typing up this review on it and listening to YouTube coming in at 3 hours and 30 minutes. But for context, this laptop only has a 47 watt-hour battery. I've reviewed laptops in the past which have double that capacity, yet almost half that runtime, and this runtime even matches my personal undervolted 9750H laptop with exactly the same battery capacity. To me, this was really surprising because, again, we're talking about a desktop chip inside here matching the endurance of a mobile chip while being noticeably better when plugged in. Alright, so let's close things off here with the Commandos Glock 5 Gen 2. The configuration that I have here costs 3,929 ringgit, or the equivalent of $955 which is pretty competitive given that the other alternatives out there, while they may be cheaper, are only packing a mobile grade CPU or GPU. Not only that, if reviewing these other cheaper laptops has taught me anything, is that those machines are generally usually only good in price and specs on paper, with throttling and overheating to be expected, build quality really leaving a lot to be desired, and they usually cut corners with things like the display, the keyboard, the trackpad, you name it. This is where I can seriously recommend the Glock 5 Gen 2 as a really solid, near no compromise option, because just about the only things that I didn't really like about this laptop is that the speakers aren't nice and punchy, the display doesn't get bright or dark enough, the design is a bit dated and kinda generic, that top logo scratches easily, and the naming is just a bit lame, but that's seriously just about it. Every other aspect of this laptop has seriously impressed me, from the display accuracy, the webcam, the keyboard, the trackpad, the I/O connectivity, the CPU performance, the GPU performance, the battery life for a desktop chip laptop, and most importantly, the cooling using only 2 heat pipes, still managing to keep everything below 80 Celsius easily, makes this extremely easy for me to recommend the Glock 5 Gen 2 as a budget gaming laptop that does really well at not cutting corners, cheaping out on components and build, and just has very little compromise that I can think of. Seriously, do check out this laptop if you're in the market for one, and good job to Tech Armory and Commandos on this machine. I was honestly quite hesitant to check out this machine because I admittedly had preconceived notions on a desktop chip laptop, but you know what? I'm actually really glad that I was proven wrong. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much the end of the review. If you'd like to get one for yourself, you can check out their website that I will link down in the description below. If you like this review, well, giving it a like, sharing it, commenting down below really helps my channel, and of course consider subscribing to me if you like my work, and of course if you'd like to see more. And yeah, oh wait, if you're already subscribed, thank you, but don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified for any of my future videos. Nearly had a slip there, it's like blank out. My name is Yang the Tech Rodent, and you know what, I think that if Tech Armory's other offerings are anything like this, then I really can't wait to check out more of what they have to offer. I'll see you guys in the next video. This way.